show you how this works, just some visualization things, just to kind of orient. And then I'm going to create an individual sales goal and a team goal to sort of show you what the difference is between those. And the first thing that I'll do here is I'm going to share out, and I trust that you can see the my shared desktop there. Okay, so what I'll do is navigate to sales. So I'm just going to use the web client here. And the first thing that you might notice is that goals, goal metrics, and Rollup queries, they're all record types or entities in Dynamics CRM 2011. You know, much the same way, obviously different kind of information is stored there, but you know, if I click here on accounts, I'm looking at a list of accounts with the fields and records exposed. And similarly, if I click on goals, so the implementation is very CRM-ish in the sense that goals, goal metrics, and Rollup queries are all simply just new record types. Now, notice the default view that I've got selected here, active goals. Now, here's one of the things that this is one of the most obvious things when you first start working with goals. In Dynamics CRM 2011, if I go to the right of any list and I expand that little area here, this is a chart area. So I can always expose a chart for the underlying record types the data that I'm looking at. And the first thing that you'll see here, if I go to something like this chart area, these are the 5 built-in charts that are predefined specifically to make it easy to work with goals. But if I choose the goal progress money chart, this isn't a very useful chart because this view, the underlying view, has so many records in it, and they're records of all kinds of different scales. They don't necessarily have any relationship to each other. It's not very useful. Notice how many data points there are. Even if you do something like this, you know, and this is just a general thing you can do in CRM. I can change where that chart area is. I can move it to the top if I want to. But this, even though I can sort of see the data points, it doesn't really help much because the data is not comparable. So let me push this back over to I usually like this on the right. But the reason that that's like that is because what you're really supposed to do, the way this is intended to work, is you select an underlying view that does make sense. So if I drill down, so I've drilled down, you know, from the forest. Now here we are, you know, looking at some of the trees, but this I can actually sort of make sense of. I selected a view that I've created that has goal records that are comparable. So here's Q1 sales goals for Alan, here's Q2, Q3, Q4, and you can kind of start to make sense of this now. So if I go over here and I look at, okay, here's the target, that's the blue, and you know, he's got a good fourth quarter going, the actual is already above the target, and there's more in progress to come. Now if I select different views here, choose Connie's sales, right? So now I've got the same basic representation of the data, but a different data set here. So I've got all these views that I can define. And what I've done here, these views with stars, it's just a little thing I do to make sure that I can remember which are views that are custom ones that I defined and which are not. So all these active goals, all goals, inactive, these are all system views that come with Dynamics CRM. So I can look at sales goals by those, you know, by people, but notice what else I can do. I can look at Q4 sales by business line. So here's a different slice of the data. And notice that each one of these, so for the AdventureWorks, accessories, bikes, service, I can define the target and then keep track of in progress and actual and how they roll up there. So that's the first takeaway is, you know, don't be too discouraged if the first thing you see with a lot of goals defined doesn't make a lot of sense, because it's not necessarily supposed to. You need to select the right view to make that make sense. Now what I want to do is create a new one, just to sort of show you how this works. And with goals, as with other record types in Dynamics CRM 20, I can simply do this little flyout menu and choose new, or I can always navigate to a list and just click this new button on the ribbon, either way. And I'm going to create a new individual sales goal for one of the sales reps, just to sort of show you how that process works of creating these things. So the scenario here is, you know, I had Richard and Connie and Alan. I had sales goals for those 3 sales reps, but I'm going to make a new, you know, I've got a new sales rep on the team, Ben, and I'm going to call this something like Q4 Ben sales, just to kind of go along with the convention that I've been using, and you'll maybe see in a couple minutes why I might do this. I'll tab down. This is not going to have a parent goal. Talk about that later. If I tab down to the goal owner and I start typing somebody, CRM will go look up and see that I've got a user that kind of matches that and suggests that, and I can accept that. I'll call this an individual sales goal. Notice the star here. This is a custom attribute that I added to this thing, and I just put the little star there just to sort of flag it for now, so you could see. Now, remember I said that every goal has to have an underlying goal metric that it's based on? Here's a good example where you do that. So I've got this sales goal metric that basically all of my revenue goals will be based on. In a minute I'll show you what that underlying goal metric looks like. But remember, this is the goal that we're creating here. So this is a little bit more specific than the underlying goal metric. I can use a fiscal period or choose a custom period. This is kind of cool. You know, I've configured my fiscal period, and if you remember in CRM20, once you configured your fiscal period, you could never change it. You had to reinstall Dynamic CRM practically to change your fiscal period. In Dynamic CRM 2011, that's not the case. Not only can you change your fiscal period, but if I wanted to say do a monthly goal, I choose custom period and call this, instead of Q4, I maybe call it October, and I make it from 10/1 through 10/31. But let's just do this. Let's use a fiscal period for now. Here's the target. Suppose I wanted to give them a target of 100,000. So let's take a 0 off that instead of a million, right? Okay. So now I've got this $100,000 target for the 4th quarter for Ben, and I've got that goal metric. And if I scroll down here a little bit, this complicated looking goal criteria section that talk about records set for roll-up and things like that, I don't need to worry about that for this kind of goal. For this kind of goal, everything I've done up here, this is sufficient to define this goal. I'll show you what I mean in a second. If I click save, I do have to, let's see, where's my fiscal period? I thought I did that. Fiscal period, oh, I got to select it. Q4, because I chose custom period and it wiped out the defaults. So here's Q4, fiscal 2010. Save the goal. Now the goal is well defined. And if I close the goal, and I go back to my big unwieldy list of all these active goals, let me collapse the chart area for a minute. And I've got a bunch of columns here. Let's go find the goal owner, and let's sort by that column. So here's a bunch of goals that are owned by Alan. Here's this goal I just created for Ben Burton. And notice that even though the target's 100,000, there's nothing there for actual and in progress. That's because goals need to be recalculated. I mentioned that actual and in progress are calculated fields. So these things do not change dynamically. You could have all kinds of underlying records here. And in fact, I already have some opportunity records that will contribute to this goal, but I won't see them unless I recalculate. Once I do recalculate, notice what happened? Notice Q4 Ben sales now has an in progress value of 300,000. There wasn't anything there before. And if I reopen the goal record, you can sort of see something interesting. What we've got is we've got this participating records concept. If I click on in progress for Ben, now why does Ben have 300,000 there? Well, you can see it from here. There's a $250,000 open opportunity, and if I double click on the opportunity record, I can drill down through the goal record to the so-called participating records, and according to the rules, the way that goal metric is defined, this opportunity meets the criteria for inclusion in this goal. Because notice what we've got. If we scroll down far enough, I'll see that sure enough, the owner of this record is Ben Burton. So here we go. Now watch what happens if I close this record. Let's close this record as 1. Would that it were this easy to close a $250,000 deal, right? And notice the close date, 10/27/2010. That meets the criteria for inclusion in this category here. So now this is an actual, record there, and an actual contributor to the actual goal. If I do a save and close, even though it doesn't show up here, that's because I have to recalculate. So if I recalculate again, so now see what's happened? You kind of get a feel for this. Now, the in progress is dropped because the 250,000 went from in progress to actual. And now if I did something like, how about if I filter, let's expand the chart area here, and let's filter the underlying data set. This is a new thing too, the fact that you can filter an underlying data set. And let's filter by a specific goal owner, and let's choose Ben here. And when you apply a filter, you then have the option of refreshing the chart with the underlying filter, and there you go. So now you can see, you know, Ben's already doing pretty well against his targets for Q4, even though, you know, he might not even know he has this goal record assigned to him yet, because the opportunities were already in there. So that's an example of a pretty straightforward to create an individual goal. What I want to do here real quick is create a team goal, just to sort of show you the difference in process, because this is a little bit trickier. And I think if you think about this a little bit, maybe review the recording, you'll see why this is a good example of this, the roll-up query concept. So I'm going to call this November team sales. And similarly, I'm not going to create a parent goal for it. But what I'm going to do here is the goal owner is not going to be a person, it's going to be a team. So I can assign a record to a team in Dynamics CRM2011. I'm going to go select this, and this is going to be a sales team goal. It's going to use the same underlying metric. It'll still be sales. And this is not going to be for fiscal period. This is for custom. Remember, I called it November. So let's make this go from 11 to 11/30, I believe. November has 30 days, right? And let's give this a, I don't know, how about 500,000 target. Now, what's the problem with this? If I save this, I can save it. And if I recalculate, notice you can recalculate within here too. If I click recalculate when I'm in a goal, even though it always tells me it'll take a while, but I've never known it to really take that long. Notice if I go down to here, I have read-only fields that reflect those calculated fields, so actual, in progress, everything is 0. Why is that? Even though I know that there are opportunities that meet the criteria, there are opportunities in this database for November. This is the issue here. The problem here is that all the records that I want to show up in here, which is all sales for November, they're not owned by that sales team. They have individual owners, so that's when I have to use a roll-up query. Okay, so what kind of a roll-up query do I need here? This is kind of an interesting one. I've got one created called all sales, and if I select it, for both of those, both in progress and actual, those calculated values need to know what the rules are for when you calculate what records should be included in that roll-up. So now if I save this, and I'll ignore that. In my experience with the beta, you'll see this a fair amount, but you can generally ignore it. It'd be cruel and unusual to send every one of those to Microsoft. Okay, and it never seems to hurt anything, so that's kind of a false positive. So I've saved it. Now let's recalculate this record, the goal. And now if you scroll down here, notice that we've got 260,000 some odd dollars in progress. That's because those records were included in that set. Now, what is this all sales roll-up query? If I click on that, I can open the query, and this is kind of an odd looking query. Here's how you define a roll-up query. It just looks like an advanced find, which you're probably used to seeing. And notice there's no criteria here. In this case, it's what I want, right? I want all sales records to be eligible for inclusion here, because if they're not in November, they're already going to be filtered out by this thing here, right? And if there are other criteria, you know, everything else, the work is done by the goal metric. And so in this case, since I want everything rolling up here, all sales records, or all opportunity records, that would be the way to do it. Sometimes, like if you've got a business line or a product line, you're going to narrow it down a little bit by the roll-up query. But anyway, so that's an example of when you might want to use a roll-up query. Now, let me jump back to the deck for a minute.